is a religion in India. It's not merely colonial and colonial representation alone, because we are discovering that the way Westerners have talked about us shows a consistent structure over centuries, in fact over millennia. Ra, for example, has been working 1100, 1200, 1300, 300 after the Common Era. A certain structure emerges about the way of talking about India. So we want to know, assuming that all the people who studied India are sincere, I mean, there's no point in presupposing, see, missionaries wanted to convert us. Yes. Why? Because they love humanity, you know. Don't think they're the criminals, they are not. They leave the comfort of their home.
There is also another important thing that was raised by Jacob, and that's the question between motivations and descriptions we are discussing here. Right? That means how the Europeans, whatever they were, coming to India, describe the experience of India, or their own experience they have about Indian experience. And basically, now I want to first clarify and then say something to it. Do you really intend to say that in this particular case we are discussing here, there is no connection between motivations and descriptions?
There's no connection between the motivations and the limitations on the description. And what we want to do today is develop a better understanding of the Indian traditions. Hindu tradition, Buddhist tradition, Jaina tradition. Now, in order to do so, we have to find out what the limitations are of the existing descriptions. And those limitations were there among the missionaries, among India lovers. So in that sense, the motivation is completely irrelevant to the structure and the constraints of the description.
So in this case, I disagree. Because if you say that the motivations does not push anyhow the boundaries of understanding Indian traditions, then from my own research, when you come to the break of colonial rule and the descriptions produced in the 60s, 70s and 80s of the last century of the particular traditions I was interested in, then I saw the shift, really.
You might see, the problem of market is this. If we see, at an individual level of an individual actor, even there, first of all, we have difficulty in establishing a motive. Yeah. We can guess at the motive. Even if the person says that's his motive, he or she might be lying, so you don't know. So anyway, this is first of all difficulty of establishing. But let's assume that somehow we can do that and we can figure out why one individual did what he or she did on the basis of his other motive. But the problem then becomes a huge explanatory problem if you postulate some kind of a causal connection between the two to explain the consistency, the structural consistency of descriptions over millennia, unless you attribute to all of them one and the same motive. That is ridiculous by any standards. So, in that sense, we will have to accept, even if at an individual level motives are important, if there is a structural similarity, you have to look for something which overrides all your motives to give you the structural descriptions. Even Said, when he talks about manifest and latent Orientalism, doesn't talk in terms of motives, because that is also precisely his problem. You cannot expect the sheer knitted togetherness and consistency of Orientalism on the basis of motives.
Looking at I guess the organisation of Hinduism as a religion, and I do believe that that period was a significant period for the organisation of a religion called Hinduism, precisely because it's the period during which this notion, which we referred to several times during the conference, the notion of world religions as a discourse or a paradigm, or whatever you want to call it, was developing, not in a colonial context actually, but in a much broader context. So you know, several people, not least Matsuzawa, has made this point that this was a period when the dominant paradigm, which we now, you know, not work with, but it is sort of predominantly understood when people talk about religion these days, was developing during this period. So for me, this is a significant period for the emergence of what is, you know, today understood outside of conference halls as Hinduism or whatever else. This process of emergence developed through dialogue. Of course, there were different power relationships in that dialogue, but nevertheless, it's a sense of dialogue, and it's significant for people like Vivekananda that they had that opportunity to have dialogue. And of course, Vivekananda is, you know, a very influential person in the image of, or might I say, the representation of Hinduism, which is now fairly predominant.
For a while I was thinking about your response, Paolo, and if I understand well, what you say is that the main problem in studying centuries of link with India from the European side is that we cannot really spot each and every thousands years, thousands numbers, person's motivations. I mean, there is, I'm just putting things together still, but there is one thing connected to it. I don't think it's really necessary. I mean, this is one approach, one possible methodology based on certain assumptions. But again, from the point of historian, you have dominant ideologies that are imposing on people what should they feel motivated by, and even though the motivations are not working, people still do it, and that's important for historians. And this might be the case in missionaries dealing with India.
My problem with motives is this. There are three kinds of problems. One is, we don't have a clear understanding in any psychological theory of today what motives are or how they function. We cannot even distinguish between a motive and motivation. I'm talking about the level of psychology, not just theory. Our philosophical theories do not tell us anything except a vague thing called intentionality, and there's a lot of debate about it. We still don't know what intentionality is. First kind of problem. So we are very unclear what it is. Second is, you can transform anything into a motive. A goal can become a motive. A means can become a motive. Belief can become a motive. For instance, in the story that Sharada gave about this Monia Williams, he wanted to destroy Hinduism. Is that the motive of Monia Williams? Is it theological belief? Depends. That means whether or not something, was it his goal to destroy? Maybe it was not at all his motive to do so, but it's his goal. What then would distinguish the goal from a theological belief, from a psychological motive? It depends very much on the kind of description you give. In other words, you can pick up anything and give such a description, anything, with a limit of course, but give such a description that appears as a motive. You're doing a guessing game. Second kind of problem. Third kind of problem. It is not at all clear to us what kind of image of man and human beings in society presupposes. Because, for example, one of the things that Indian psychologists or Indian traditions claim is that human beings are moved by desires. Okay? That, are we to take desires as motives? Are we to assume that there are no motives? Are we to assume, what are we supposed to, in other words, we are not clear. The story about motive, what kind of a being is presupposed, and how much, to what extent is a part of which anthropology. In other words, don't do as though that you're solving problems by using the word motive. You're begging them, and begging them by the millionfold. So my suggestion is, until you're clear about it, what they are, steer clear of ascribing motives, because you cannot know it.